Hey, good people. Welcome to the Evolving Education Project podcast, hosted by me, Dr. Tiffany Amniachai, and friends, where we center the educational joys, passions, interests, and inquiries of people of color. This is episode 21. Coming up is a discussion of community and university responsibilities to community-driven efforts and movements in education. Specifically, our guest author asks, what does it mean to interrupt the colonial project that universities have put on communities? We would like to begin by shouting out the top 4 cities who listened to last week's episode. Coming in at number 1 is the Chi, of course. Then we have State College, Pennsylvania, Pennsville, New Jersey, Wilmington, Delaware, and Farmingdale, New York. We appreciate y'all for pressing play and listening in your car, at the gym, on your walk, wherever. When we see a large group of listeners from specific areas, it is most likely due to word of mouth. So thank you to those who are getting the word out. Please continue to share this podcast with others. I also want to shout out one of our listeners with the Instagram handle Fatima B06. I'm laughing because I know who this is, but she may not want me to say her name, but I know who you are. Thank you, girl. Thank you for liking a few of our Instagram reels last week. Only the real listeners know to do that. This episode is the author interview, part 2 of our And the Struggle Continues series. To start from the beginning of the series, go to episode 20 and listen all the way through. We don't want you to miss any part of this powerful series. Today, we will be interviewing our inspiration for the series, Dr. David O. Stovall, author of the book Born Out of Struggle, Critical Race Theory, School Creation, and the Politics of Interruption. The context for this book is Chicago, Illinois, and the proclamation, "We were born out of struggle and the struggle continues," often chanted by Little Village students in their fight for a quality education, ground this book and series. Dr. David Stovall is a professor in the departments of Black Studies and Criminology, Law, and Justice at the University of Illinois at Chicago. His scholarship investigates critical race theory, the relationship between housing and education, and the intersection of race, place, and school. In an effort to move theory to action, he works with community organizations and schools to address issues of equity, justice, and abolishing the school-prison nexus. His work led him to become a member of the design team for the Greater Lawndale Little Village School for Social Justice, SOJO, which opened in the fall of 2005. His work with community students and teachers manifested itself in his involvement with the People's Education Movement, a collection of classroom teachers, community members, students, and university professors in Chicago, Los Angeles, and the San Francisco Bay Area, who engage in collaborative community projects centered in creating relevant curriculum. In addition to his duties and responsibilities as a professor at UIC, he served as a volunteer social studies teacher at the Greater Lawndale Little Village School for Social Justice from 2005 to 2018. In his critical book, Born Out of Struggle, Critical Race Theory, School Creation, and the Politics of Interruption, Dr. David Stovall provides an account of the careful and critical attempt to put critical race theory to work by testing its utility in community struggle. He professes a, and I quote, distaste for theories that claim to be aimed at social justice while offering few connections to community engagement and authentic accountability of researchers to the communities we work with. In essence, this book grapples with community and university responsibilities to community-driven efforts and movements in education. Rooted in the initial struggle of community members who staged a successful hunger strike to secure a high school in the Chicago neighborhoods of La Villita and North Lawndale, Stovall details his firsthand participation in the process to help design the school. Through his account of this politics of interruption, we learn, quote, the ways in which community members actively resist and navigate local and state power in demanding quality education. This process revealed critical race praxis at work, or the quote, necessary actions of communities engaging in the day-to-day realities of demanding quality education. I am excited to have Dr. Aja D. Reynolds join me as co-host for this episode. Aja D. Reynolds is an assistant professor in the Teacher Education Department at Wayne State University. She received her doctorate degree in the Educational Policy Studies Social Foundations program at the University of Illinois at Chicago. With over 12 years of experience as an educator, youth worker, Dr. Reynolds' scholarly work has focused on her collaborative work in creating fugitive or freedom spaces with Black girls through the use of art, activism, and healing as she explores geographies of Black girlhood. Aja is excited about continuing her work with educators and communities in sustaining freedom schooling for Black youth. This interview was originally recorded in the fall of 2021, but it is still very relevant. All other episodes in this series were recorded within the last couple of weeks. So now let's listen in on our interview with Dr. David Stovall.
I just got off a super frustrating phone call with the foundation.
Super fresh. You know what? That sound like you know what I was reading about in this book here. Now what that sound like your book. Now what's frustrating? What they doing?
Well, the thing is, they do these kind of large pitches to universities about topics that they find interesting. So literally it was me on a Zoom call with a bunch of my homies at UIC who do work that centers around race, class, and gender. And they were kind of listening for pitches or what have you from us. So I got on the call and the dude says, well, we don't fund social science or K-12 work. And I'm like, bro, so is it like thanks but no thanks? And then he's just like, oh, no, that's not what I'm saying, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, look, man, miss me with all the bullshit. What are you asking? Right. And that, some of my colleagues, so it was homies on the call and then it was folks who I work with. Right. So the folks who I work with want to do all this ass kissing to me because they got a ton of dough. But I just kind of took it and said, look, y'all, I'm not interested in cannibalizing my homies. I'm not interested in kowtowing to some stuff because y'all think it sounds slick for the moment. We gonna be here. We gonna do our shit if y'all fund it or not. Thanks so much. So, it's one of those things. So, that might get me uninvited to the next meeting, but that ain't nothing new.
Yeah, you used to that, right?
Yeah, it's just what it is. It's what it is.
You used to that. So, yeah, so that's I'm trying to get my words together, but I think you're such a good example for us to think about what really matters and not getting caught up in just trying to, we need these resources and we want these resources, some of us, but not lowering our principles or the mission just to get money. And I think that's what I appreciate about your book, about all of the tensions within doing this type of work. The good thing is we read this in my class on ethnic studies and the learning sciences. And they critique the way I organize. They was like, Dr. Nechai, you should have put the videos with him talking made us look at the tour of Little Village with the book. And you should, so in class, they like made resources to go along with the book. I was like,
oh, damn. Nice.
I'm gonna show you the resources, but they gathered some old political cartoons from that neighborhood. They found some student projects where they did a tour of Little Village, of course, stuff of you talking. So I'm gonna weave in one of my questions. I'll weave in something I saw from a video that goes with the book. So we got it's documented. So they confirmed if you was telling the truth in your book.
Oh, word up, shit, you always got to, you need that.
So they was doing that. But so how does this chant goes? Because I want to make sure we say this throughout this interview. I heard it in one of the video resources my students gave me from I think it was a meeting, a community meeting or something. But we were born out of struggle and the struggle continues. Don't one
Yep.
person say the first part and then the other
Yep.
person say the first?
Yep. It's like
Okay.
born out of struggle, the struggle continues.
Okay. Can you say it? Say born out of struggle so I can say it.
So born out of struggle,
the struggle continues.
Right.
So we got to throw that in. Okay. And I only learned that from looking at the research. Listen, y'all got to, when you get this book, because you need to read it, first of all, you're going to get a history lesson. Amen. You're going to get a thorough history lesson. You're going to get the theorization to understand. My students was like, I actually understand critical race theory. And I was like, you do? Oh, because he wrote that, explain that for you. You're going to understand the theory so that y'all can stop being out here saying critical race theory and you don't know what you're talking about. Number two, what I appreciate most is that what you say, it is an example of how you are putting critical race theory to work. And this book shows how we put critical race theory and critical race praxis to work. So I guess my first question is, okay, first I want to start out. I love that your foreword is written by parents. Like, we all love that. I love that it's written by parents from the school and organizers and community organizers, and that they start off the book, how we read that. And I hope I'm pronouncing this right. If I'm mispronounced, correct me. But Helgistas, am I saying that right?
Yep, Helgista, yep.
Helgistas. Okay. So you have Helgistas, Patricia Maria Buenrostro, and Carolina Gates.
Yeah, her last name is Gaete.
Gaete. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Gaete. Okay, so in the foreword, they recall the events leading up to and their participation in the Little Village hunger strike beginning on Mother's Day, no less, and sustaining this movement beyond that. And Carolina cautions us to consider how we include communities, right, in this work. And you later claim that your work would be impossible without the community's blessing. So to begin, what's the difference, just so we can get started, what's the difference between, and Carolina mentions this in the foreword, community ownership and community buy-in? And why is that important for us to think about in our work?
Yeah, I think the most important piece around that difference between community ownership and community buy-in, ownership means that you are constantly in relationship and you are held to account by that community, right? So it's not something that is yours, right? So being a member of the design team doesn't mean that I lay claim to the school. My actions were in responsibility or in response to and in communication with the community demand, right? So nothing was cracking if it did not go through the community first, right? So we were there because of the community demand, where buy-in is saying you have something and here's where the community can say, all right, we're down with this thing that you have. And this was completely the opposite, in opposed to saying the community made the demand. Now here's what we're willing to do in relationship to that demand, and always holding that in the center.
And I think I appreciate how you do that throughout the book, because you could easily forget, and how you even say something like I think CPS was describing it as an event, like the hunger strike as an event. And you're like, no, this is the catalyst. And we're going to keep coming back to the hunger strike to remind us to shape our work moving forward, and to remind us why we're doing what we're doing and what we're doing. And I think that's really important, because it could really get lost. And it doesn't get lost. Not only you show how you all kept keeping that to the front, but also in your writing, it could get lost. You know what I mean? And it didn't get lost in either. And it really pushed, okay, this ain't supposed to be about me and my writing, but I did think a lot about my writing reading your There's one line I might not be able to cite you, but I'm still one line for my application. But no, I'm just, look at me said,
Look, don't even trip. It's all good.
It did make me think about my writing. But anyway, Asia, you jump in whenever you want.
No, I mean, I'm just thinking about, Stove, I feel like your book is centered around how this interruption that's happening in this K through 12 space, right? But I thought a lot too as a researcher, how your book is such an interruption to how we're taught to do research. And so, like, even by you having the two mothers in the forward like that, like, I know this is always a back and forth, even with publishing, right? Like trying to co-author with folks who aren't scholars, right? And all those different things. And so I just want to know how you were able to negotiate that on the level of, like, with your editor, of pushing back and creating the academic book, but still trying to make sure the voices of those who was part of the process, who blessed the process, were able to have a voice in this as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because I didn't get approved in terms of the book proposal until the actual fourth proposal, right? So everybody else, they wanted the book to be about the hunger strike, right? They wanted the hunger strike to be the foci because that was the sexy thing. And it just so happened that the folks at SUNY, when I sent it to them, they were like, absolutely. And I told them, I said, I want to have two of the hunger strikers who ended up being parents of Sojo students to write the foreword. They were like, no problem. But I had to your point, Asia, I had to go through 3 different publishing houses to get that approval, because everybody, and I would have conversations with people. They would say, man, we love what you're writing, but we feel like the focus should be on the hunger strike. And one of my guys had already written his dissertation on the hunger strike. So right. I was like, that's not responsible on my end. And it's really not talking about the community responsibility or university responsibility to community-driven efforts. And that's where I wanted to keep the focus. Like, what does it mean to interrupt the colonial projects that universities have put forward on communities? And a lot of publishing houses weren't necessarily keen to that or trying to hear that. So the fourth publishing house was the one that actually let me engage the project on my own terms.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That makes me think about, it's interesting because, and I hope people who create design courses really think about this. A lot of people, I think that this should be a book that's in a research methods course. Like, I think you can look at the title and you can think that it's about, it's about this situation and it's presenting the findings, right? But it's a research study, right? But it's so about research methodologies and processes. And we don't have enough examples of, what does it mean to be a scholar, a theorist, and an activist and an educator, not just as a professor, but in schools. And you're from Chicago, even though you weren't from those two areas in the book. But I think I don't think we have enough examples of that. And then how do you dealing with those tensions and trying to watch that? So that brings me to my next question and thought or reflection that I would love to hear more about is, so I talk real big. So I'm always like, I love how but that's just me. But I love how you describe your active reflection around being very careful about not being positioned as the expert and really trying to, like you were just talking about disrupting these colonial relationships between universities and communities, how due to your positioning, like being aware of the privilege and the power that you hold coming into those space, those spaces, why you're being asked to come into those spaces as a university professor. But I found a video where you were, it's not a but as you didn't live it, but it's like a but another side that I'm thinking about. In this, I think it was the town meeting. It was a town hall in this situation, and you got up to have words. And you first start off. Now, when I first met you, you did this too, but I want us to think about, I think this would be helpful to other scholars who move like this. So you start out by introducing yourself as Dave Stovall, right? Let me tell my little story real quick. So when I first met Dave, let me tell you this. I was at AERA. It's connected. I was at AERA, and I went to Critical Educators for Social Justice business meeting for the first time. And we were in groups, and different scholars were guests there, you know, talking to the small group. So I was in one small group, and the scholar was great, blah, 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 blah. But I heard somebody in this other small group next to me, and he sounded like a preacher, but he was cussing. And I said, who is this person that sounds like a preacher, but he cussing? So I go up to you. I don't know who you are. I don't know nothing. I said, excuse me, who are you and what do you do? And you was like, my name is Dave Stovall, and I'm in Chicago, and blah, 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 blah. And I think that's important because in this town hall, I saw you introduced when it was time for you to have words to speak back to the school administration for what they were not doing well. I think it was at Sojo at the school. Start off when you get to the mic and you're like, hi, I'm Dave Stovall. And you really center just a person being Dave Stovall working with the community and how you're a part of the design team and blah, 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 blah. Then after you give the points that you are critiquing and challenging the school administration for, you then talk about how they misuse educational researcher, to which you then identify yourself as an educational researcher at that point. So you start off introducing your
positioning.
Yeah, you start off, you just Dave Stovall. You just a person you just your homie from the neighborhood that's concerned about schools, right? That's how you start off and you do this all in one standing up at the podium. And then you go through, you talk about you say I'm a part of the design team. You say how long your history with it. You say your issues with the school administration. And then you talk about how the school administration uses and misuses educational researcher, to which at that point you then slip in that you're an educational researcher, right? And that I'm a university professor. And so I guess, can you say more about your caution, to make sure that you are always reflective on your positioning and that you're not positioned as like an expert or the sole expert, but then you also are strategic, right? And why is it important for researchers, especially researcher activists or those of us who do community work, to hold both of those things, like to be cautious, but also be strategic?
Right. And it's a navigation, right? Because it's really around you not entering, because in recognition of the colonial relationship that universities have had to communities, it's never a space to enter with that, right? You only utilize that where it's necessary, right? Because in that, and I know exactly that video that you're talking about, because what they were trying to do was to say to folks that they didn't understand it, right? And my point was to say, look, you're talking to, before you continue, note that you're talking to someone who does what you're reporting on for a living. So I'm going to ask you to go back and now begin to explain to me and everybody else what this thing is. Because so now it's using the resources. So I had the resources of my particular training to ask a particular question so they couldn't blow that over on the families. So it was really kind of using that space to interrupt, not as some flex around, oh, I'm a big researcher dude, but to go back to their statement and say, look, before you start talking crazy about this, I want you to know that you're talking about somebody who does the work that you're reporting on right now for a living. So choose your words carefully. So it was that thing around demonstrating solidarity with community folks, because we see that all the time when districts try to talk to folks to explain stuff. They try to pass stuff over on them without explaining what's happening.
Mm-hmm. And I like how you, this is just you doing a perfect segue into each of my questions up here, Dr. Stovall.
I just wanted to say though, real quick though, I
ahead.
remember seeing Stove in action do that at Sojo when the principal got ousted that time, and y'all had a like emergency community meeting, and we was like so hyped, right, when Stove took the mic, because you know what I mean, because they were literally talking bullshit to the community, right, like trying to talk bullshit like they didn't know. And it was just so hyped when Stove took the mic, because it was like, okay, so now y'all gonna have to rethink them lies. Y'all gonna have to rethink them lies, right? Like, because now you're talking to folks who actually know. And so I just think that's so important, how we think about also how language gets used in the spaces, and how they are also wielding their power at those moments, to try to throw communities off and give this disillusion around the work that they're doing.
We hear the word like solidarity a lot. I think for me, I'm hearing it less than I did maybe 3-4 years ago, but I do think I still hear it, right? Solidarity. So you state that solidarity is developed through the process of working with others instead of doing research on them. And you show how you worked to develop solidarity throughout the book. But later on, you also claim that from my own participation on the design team, I slowly learned that solidarity was a contested phenomenon, challenging me to understand collective over singular desires to speak truth to power. And so how do we work if we're thinking about solidarity? We really want to do solidarity, and we're all saying that we're working towards that. How do we work to understand collective desires over singular desires in our work with communities? Because I just don't think that's easy to do. And I don't think people are interrogating that throughout the process as you do in this book.
This thing around navigating that solidarity over these kind of individual desires, I think one of the things that becomes critically important is that you have to come to grips with, you may not actually agree wholeheartedly with the way in which the group wants to move, but solidarity says that the disagreement is perfectly fine. Let's get our own clarity around what it is that we're trying to do, right? Let's return to what it is that we're trying to do, right? And that happened in a number of instances, right? One where the CEO of Chicago Public Schools was in a meeting, and he said something that wasn't incorrect. That was incorrect, I should say. And I was about to jump in, but I had to think, okay, don't jeopardize what the community is trying to do because you want to bang out on this dude, right? So really thinking about that, right? Always thinking about what it is that the community is trying to do and keep that center, right? And even when we were hiring a principal, it was this thing around, okay, let's keep into focus what it is that we're trying to do. But at the same time, let's keep also in the conversation all of the contestations that could happen, right? Because they were in between hiring two principals, and one principal had a terrible track record of doing some really unsavory things at the schoolhouse that she was currently at. And a parent came into one of the meetings and said, look, y'all need to pay attention to this, because where she's at now, there's a lot of stuff going on that's really harmful. And really having the conversation around with the parents to say, look, this has the greatest potential to be bad. Whatever we decide is what we decide. But I want folks to know that this has the potential to be bad. And really, the other part of that is trusting that relationship, right? Because the vote to hire the other principal was literally 7-6, right? So we had to sit with that and just be like, man, that was one that we just scraped by. But at the same time, that to me is what solidarity means in terms of understanding that there aren't always agreements, but we're clear about what it is that we're trying to do in those particular instances. And in this case, making sure that the schoolhouse was open and that we could do stuff in the schoolhouse that were conducive to the express needs of the community and the young folks in the building.
So I wanted to add on to that question, Tiff, because I'm also thinking about how contested that space is in terms of race, the racial tension that exists right there at that line between Little Village and North Lawndale, right? And so, I mean, this is always a question I feel like people asking about multiracial solidarity. And I just wanted to see if you could just talk more about that, because I think folks don't realize how hard it is, especially on the back of anti-Blackness, right?
Yep.
Soldiers around the corner from Farragut, right? Like the Black students at Farragut make sure after school they walk home in a big group together and get the hell out of their community, right as soon as school ends, right? You know what I mean? Like that's still, I think people might think of that area as historically having those issues, but those issues still exist, right? In a place like Chicago that is still hella segregated. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you put that into context, it's something that you have to constantly revisit, right? It's something that you have to negotiate in perpetuity, right? So you have to really take into account not just neighborhood beef, but racial beef, right? So this thing around two communities that are right next to each other that have very little contact with each other. And then when there is contact, it's hella tension. So now, in opposed to running away from that, what does it mean for us to go right into that contradiction? Why are we at each other, right? What are the ways that fuels this? And now, when we come to think about it, what are our concerns? And now, do we contribute deeper to the Hunger Game in terms of pitting folks against each other? Or to say, look, we know what this is. So now the real struggle is against how people want to perpetuate white supremacy in our own spaces, right? So it gets us into a different conversation. It gets into a conversation of what informs how we engage people other than ourselves and people that we are familiar with, right? And it's something that some of the early mistakes that we made was that, okay, it was beef, not a beef is squashed, it's good. That's not the way. The thing is to say, okay, that was one beef. What are we willing to do to step in front of those things? So if this thing happens again, we're a lot clearer on what it is that we need to do. That for us, transformative justice was key, right? So it was really important around people confronting that anti-Blackness, people confronting anti-immigrant sentiment, and then saying, well, how does that play itself out in real life when we're in relationship with each other and we're interacting with each other? So it's especially in a space, in the early days of Sojo, it was about 70% Latinx and about 30% Black. And for about 10 straight years, the numbers of Black students steadily decreased, right? So this thing around always having that conversation and being intentional about it, because Black folks were really brought into that process secondarily, right? It was a machination of CPS to say there are not enough white kids in the district to desegregate. So now desegregation goes along the lines of how we demarcate race, right? So in the original proposal, they were saying, the school could be no more than 30% Latinx and no less than 30% Black, right? In terms of the numbers or what have you. But that quickly became an issue, right? To the point where some elected officials tried to get into it, right? They used their anti-Blackness to try to remove students from North Lawndale. And because of our work in the space, the students and families fought back and said, nah, this is what we should have. And it was interesting because the Latinx students were saying, no, it should actually be more Black folks here. And there's an issue here, that there are so few. So again, really putting that in context, because when you're in a city that's so segregated, you're always going to get those tensions, and those tensions are going to come up in all these different ways, right? There could be tensions from the families. It could be tensions from elected officials. It could be tensions from city folk. But at the same time, and it's interesting, there's also these moments of solidarity from families, from city folks who are willing to be fugitive, from other officials who are willing to be fugitive, and say, no, this ain't the way, and here's what we're willing to do. So it's a really important point around how you have to grapple with that all the time, right? It's not just a sometime thing. It's not something that you use in a crisis moment. You always have to have that on deck. And I think that's critically important, especially in community-driven efforts to create schools.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What I really, really appreciate, because I love theory. I love how you're like, from the onset, you're like, this is an account of an attempt to carefully, critically test the theoretical construction of CRT and its utility as critical community praxis. Now that is, I don't got the page number, but I quoted that from the book. That's somewhere in the book. I didn't say that. But I think, and that's what I think is so, I think the book is methodologically, what you write about is like, it's methodologically rigorous. And I also think it's theoretically rigorous. And I know people don't like the word rigorous, but I do think that's important when we think about, I'm not thinking about it in a colonial sense, but I'm thinking about like really putting theories to work, right? And really clearly showing how this theory is happening, like in this situation. And I appreciate that. And I think it's a good model. I think it's a good model for, I think, yes, absolutely. We can learn so much just about, even if you're not a researcher, because we have all types of listeners. This is important. Even if you're a parent, you could read this book to learn about the ways that you can engage or even organize with other, or if somebody trying to come to you and do something in your school, how should they be treating you? How should they be including you? What does this, don't be duped by, if you're really being included. So I just think it's so many entry points. I think it's all of that. You could read it. It's like a story to me. It's like a historical story and tells you the whole story. But even as a researcher, and I think it's important to think about how you really show this interaction between theory and research and action, all at the same time, methodology, theory, and action. And so I said all of that to say, okay. So when you talk about, I feel like critical race theory is the big thing. And then, but you're moving towards like, in your work, you talk about this a lot with critical race praxis, right? And you talk about how in doing this work, like the necessary actions of communities engaging in the day-to-day realities of demanding quality education. And then you go and show us like how that was hard, and how there was tensions and how it was messy. And I think we write in everything that researchers or academics write. It's always like, these social justice aims and, like we want a quality education and, we're fighting for social justice, but rarely do we see like a real example in a longitudinal way across years of something that you stuck with this, with the community. I'm sure you didn't know when you was going to be able to write this book. I'm sure you didn't know if you even knew you was going to write a book in the beginning, doesn't seem like, like that was your goal, or even knowing like, when is this going to end? And even like thinking about like being really defined about your engagement with it. And so, so I guess, I don't know if this question makes sense, but this question came to my mind. So this is also what you said. You have a distaste. I think before this you were like, I'm not going to go into like my horrors of grad school, but I have a distaste for theories that claim to be aimed at social justice while offering few connections to community engagement and authentic accountability of researchers to the communities we work with. You can answer this how you can say whatever you want about this, but this is my question that I have because I'm just thinking about the current moment in my generation of scholars coming up. How does this get lost? All of these things that you're in the current era of and celebrity of social justice and activism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think this thing around, is kind of asking this question, who are you in relationship with and what are you trying to do? Right. So for me, critical race praxis came in really strong because Eric Yamamoto's 4 tenets provided some level of account for me. Right. So it made me think about what does it mean to be accountable to the folks I say I care about. Right. So when he talks about the conceptual in terms of thinking about what the work is, and for me, that was the creation of the high school. And then he talks about the material, what do you need in that concept to now do the work that you're trying to do in terms of the resources. So for us, that was the teachers, that was the families, that was our what we were doing curricularly, right? So those things came out as the material, right? And then the third component is the performative, right? So now we got the concept, we got the materials. What are we actually doing in the place, right? So how am I team teaching this class? How am I working with one of the other groups? How am I doing some work with some community organizations who also have space in the building, right? So it's really now the performative means what is it that you're actually doing? And the fourth component being the reflexive, saying, okay, you've done these things. What went well? What did not go well? And now what are you willing to improve, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that was really an important frame for me to put theory to work. And like you said, now with the celebrity academic or the public intellectual, it's not about genuflecting on screen about how cold you are, right? Instead, it's more about saying, all right, here's what I'm concerned about. Here's some places that I'm doing my work. Here's where some things went well. Here's where some things did not go well. And I must be accountable to all the mistakes made in the process, right? So that really, and I felt like critical race praxis to me was a really important segue to abolition, right? Because abolition is challenging folks to do our work differently, right? Not just to say this doesn't work, but to literally say, what does it mean to do your work differently? Because these things don't work and you have a responsibility to build something else, right? And the other part of that is you have to build that thing with other people, right? So I think that really was important for me because it challenged me to say, look, I can get on some kind of book tour and talk about how cold this is, or I can be deeply honest with myself and say, most of the shit I wrote about did not go right, right? So this thing around really being clear about that and saying, I am willing to engage in those things that did not go well because that's the pathway to doing things differently, right? So I think it's really important to kind of put that in the conversation, and that goes against the kind of celebrity academic or public intellectual who we just kind of hold up as just doing these things right and in absentia of any type of struggle or engagement with folks.
And I mean, I think that for you, Stove, I mean, even the way that you trained us coming through grad school was just so centered around, like, you're able to do that. And I can read the book and be like, oh yeah, he was really getting down in community, because oftentimes I think in research we're taught to chase projects. right? Even if it is with communities, right?
Yep.
And this wasn't a project you were chasing. There was no way that you thought like you could come out of this with this. This wasn't a project chasing
10 years
research project. Right. And so because of that, you couldn't neatly put together the project you know what I mean? Like, it's not like you were manipulating anything or anything like that. And I think that's just so important of not only how you carried out the research, but that the fact that academia always, it feels like, it pushes us to build inauthentic relationships on the front end anyway with communities,
Yes.
because we're already thinking about this project we're trying to get out of this building with communities.
Yep.
And so I definitely think that's why you were able to talk about such messiness. And it resonates so much on me being like, oh yeah, he was getting down, because that wasn't the mission you were on when you engaged the project. I wanted to know, so I was thinking about, of course, right? Like a lot of this work began with women of color, mothers of color, right? And then you just talked about the realness of how people kept falling off, like falling off the design board, falling off the work because of the realness of life. And so then we get down to the design team, and it's just you, Rito, and Rico, right? 3 men. And so what was your responsibility at that point to make sure that those mothers, that those women, that those voices were still present in the work and honored through the work, even at the points of their absence?
Yeah, and thank you for that question, because that was really, we saw that gender dynamic also, and I think two things were really important in that process. So Rico really took it upon himself, because a lot of the moms had to tend to family issues or what have you. So Rico took it upon himself to go back to the moms and the folks who on the design team and still keep them abreast. So him and Rito, they kept in contact with folks, and they were like, look, okay, we just want to let you know what's happening. We know that you can't attend at this time, but we still want to let you know what's happening. Another thing, during that time, we were meeting individually as design teams and also collectively as design teams. And a woman who was taking us through that process was a woman named Cynthia Nambo. And
you talk about it a lot.
And Cynthia was able to keep us in tune, not just with cis hetero male patriarchy, but to really say, all right, if you're rolling this out, you have to think about what are the ways that you are engaging folks. And really from that work, it was Cynthia largely. And when we were first starting out the school, one of the things that came from that was, instead of kind of doing these large community forums, we said, okay, those are important to kind of introduce the community to the school, but we actually got to also go out to houses, right? We got to go up in the neighborhood. We got to go out in the neighborhood and talk to folks. Mm-hmm. And I think that was our way to come to grips with our shortcomings around gender, right? So we had to use approaches that would be considered feminist engagements, right? In terms of looking at the margins, looking at who's been excluded, and now starting our work there, right? So it was a really important point that we had to constantly revisit, because we had some accountability to the collection of design teams, the families, and the folks who were with us in the original days of the design team. So that those shortcomings, we had to now figure out, what were we going to do to recoup what was lost when we didn't have those perspectives contributing as we did in the earlier days. So it was really it was quite a bit of wrestling with those shortcomings, especially if we think about it in the days before the school actually opened, right? That was really important for us, because we had all of these things moving around at the same time, but also we had to come to grips with that a lot of the strength and energy that we had that was women driven were no longer present as we got closer and closer to building out the proposal.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for that question, sis, because I think what's also important to remember when we do this work. So in your situation, or in this context, it was like a gender thing. But I think sometimes when you are, and you know, it helped me understand why I'm a part of the Wakanda Alliance program. And it's this that's in Buffalo, and it's mostly Black men who started it, and they really wanted me to be a part of it. And when I'm not there, and me and these other Black women are not there, they be like, Queens, where y'all at? It ain't the same without y'all. We be like, cause we just be, you know, we get busy and stuff, right? But they reach out and they really, I appreciate how like they value and miss our presence, and they notice the difference, right? Even though they're doing awesome without us, they don't, not to say, but you know, it's a difference. But I do think that when we're doing this work, and we, you know, you work with all types of people when you do this type of work. And I think we have to think about capacity, right? And about how, and I feel like you are talking about this, even if you didn't exactly name it, but respecting the, first of all, understanding that people who have more privilege in particular areas may have more capacity to do the different tasks and to come to all of the different meetings and right? But that doesn't take away from the care and the work and the importance of the other people who may need to fall off right now, right? And that's what I love that about the brothers that I work with, that I'm a part of that group. Like, they still make me feel that, you know, when I can't show up or something, they know I'm caring for a lot of people in different ways that they care. Like they respond in that way. They know that, you know, if y'all want me to come, I want to come to this meeting with my bros, and I want to be in a good mood. I want to have joy, and I want to be a blessing to the space, right? So I want to show up right? And so if I'm caring for this people and stuff, that's less stuff that I have, and I appreciate that. How do we, I don't know how to ask this. I guess I want to know from you, when we think about like praxis and reflection and all of that, how do we, because I think sometimes we can, even in our work to do good in communities, we can get very caught up in like, who's doing the task, who's doing the details, who's doing this, and da-da-da-da-da. And then as soon as you fail, like, and that's what I love about this group, because I feel like they never make me feel bad when, if I can't show up right now. You know what I mean? They never, ever make me feel bad. If anything, they be like, sis, we miss you. You know, we're the queen. If they don't see the Black women for a while, they be like, Queens, where y'all at? Right? Because they want our presence. But I think it's a tricky spot, because we have to, like, yes, we have to understand capacity, and we have to think about how do we respect capacity, the different capacities that's really situated in how we walk through the world, how we move to the world. We know women, especially women of color, y'all know we out here having more meetings, caring for a lot of people, loving on a lot of people, giving resources, doing all of this stuff. You know, I got people in different departments that is not my students, took one class with me, and now I meet with them, you know, because, you know, you that's just the way it is. And I'm not complaining about that. I'm not complaining, but I appreciate when people understand that. And I feel like y'all understand that. So how do we do better with that? And how do we not rank people, like people that have more capacity, and then they get a better ranking of like being more committed than the people who, Yeah,
I think the thing is exactly to your point, right? We have to start with the understanding that folks are giving of themselves what they can. And when they cannot, that's also perfectly fine. I think the challenge is to say, when it's time for them to come back in, will we let them back in? Right. And I think that's a piece around doing it in ways that were largely instructed by Black women, in terms of, especially when you look at the Black freedom movement, right? Because the majority of that internal labor was held up by Black women, right? And Black women saying, okay, here's what we're trying to do. Let's circle up when somebody is going through something. Let's see that they're okay. And then let's continue to do our piece let them do their thing, and then when they come back, all is good. I think that's a different type of understanding. And to your point, Tiff, I actually see this more with this new generation of activists, right? I see in the newer generation folks saying, look, they had to take a mental health break. Word, we got them. Let them do their thing. When they come back, it's all good. I think that's a really important lesson that we can learn from young folks, right? Because I come from a generation that you work till you die, and if you ain't bled enough, we don't give you enough love, right? So, and that has killed many of my comrades, right? Because we asked for that pound of flesh and gallon of blood, right? And I think what this new generation is saying is we can't do that if we want to be healthy for the struggle, right? So now if we're trying to be healthy for the struggle, it's going to take us to say, here's where we cut things off and take that collective healing time, right? Not the individualized self-care, but a collective self-care, right? So I was working with a group this summer called the Center for Third World Organizing, and largely a Black queer feminist collective these days. It comes from a larger history, but right now it's majority Black queer feminist grouping. And they told me this thing. They were like, man, we took all of June off organizationally. They was like, June, we done. I was like, word. I mean, it was just like, oh, okay, shit. That we need to learn more of that, right? Because it was really in their space to say, look, a lot is going on, a lot of stuff has transpired. We want to be right for ourselves, and we want to be right for our folk. So so now we're just gonna take this month to recalibrate. Right. That was a heavy lesson for me, because in my head I was still fighting like, what you mean you taking June off? You know, all that business. Right. But I was like, no, when I thought about it, I was like, damn, that's what's up. Right. You have to think about, because that to me was a tangible example of collective self-care. Yeah. Right. And if we don't have that understanding how serious it is to work under the travails of white supremacy, capitalism, and COVID, now we do ourselves a disservice, right? So that lesson I really appreciate from young folks around how to do that, and that collective self-care, or shall we say collective care, really becomes important in doing this work. So when folks have to take those breaks, it is now our responsibility to welcome them back when they are ready, on their own terms.
And I think too, like I don't want to die. I also think like when you're doing all of that, look at me, I said, because I don't want to die, but I also think like, prematurely, I don't. But I'm saying like, when you are also trying to have joy, you know what I mean? When you're trying to have joy, when you're trying to be, you know, it's, and you want to joy, you know, it's radical to do that, because, and that's why I'm so not used to, the welcoming back when you take a break, that when I experience that, I'm like surprised. I'm like, oh, it's okay. Because you come in, you be apologizing. No, I'm sorry, I ain't been here for 5 years. But I still, well, it ain't been 5 years, but 5 years. But you know, it's almost like you don't even know what to do when they just welcome you back and do all that. So I think it's also about, I do think we are trying to live fully, do the work, but live fully. And it's hard. It's not easy to do.
Yeah. I mean, reading the book was giving me shivers in terms of like, just reminded me of when I got to Chicago. That was like I was there the first year and a half, and then it was the height of the Chicago Teachers Union. And I just remember how much, like when I was organizing with Teachers for Social Justice, that we operated on such an urgency that just was not sustainable. Like, you know what I mean? It was just such a like ongoing, like every day was emergency. Something's on fire. We got to put it out right now. The struggle might end today. Like, we have to end the struggle today. And it was just a lot. And I watched how many of us usually walked away and had to walk away for a while because we would be so tired after doing that work. And so it's so critical that we're thinking about collective care. I did want to ask more of a like fun question, particularly because Stove, I know you love music. And I'm just really into like whatever I do. I'm like, I need a playlist for this. So I'm just wondering off the top of the dome, what would be 5 songs that you would say would be on a playlist that would accompany the book?
Yeah, for me, and thank you for that, because that was always
I love that too.
an interesting piece. So it's this interesting kind of combination, right? So I think a lot about a lot about Nina Simone, particularly her song Mississippi Goddamn, like that.
Because I feel like it allows you to hear and see something differently, right? Like I feel like we have so many, especially as people of color, like other literacies of how we communicate and understand something and need to hear and see and touch something. And so I just love when something is accompanying it because it just gives it another like, okay.
Yeah, like they told me, you need to add all of these resources with this book because it's all of this stuff out here. I was like, okay, well, y'all redesign my syllabus then. Only for his book. They didn't do that for nothing else.
Yeah, because I mean, like, so, like, I think about Nina Simone's Mississippi Goddamn. I think about a song by a group called Mash Out Posse, also known as MOP, called Annie Up, because that was always how we talked to the district, right? He's like, Annie up, get that fool, Annie up. He's like, get them, come up off them diamonds, like it was this thing around, look, we not taking the madness. A third song that became important for me was really around thinking about, there's a guy named Leon Thomas, and he was a jazz singer, and he had a song called The Creator Has a Master Plan. And that was always something that kind of pushed our thinking around the work. And then Outkast had a song that, it was an older song then, but it just made so much sense to me. And that's a song called Elevators. And it's in parentheses, me and you, right? But the interesting thing about Elevators, they take a piece from a Haki Matabuti poem that I was just like, oh man, because like the chorus is from a Haki Matabuti poem, right? Me and you, your mama and your cousin too, coming down a strip on Vogues, coming up slamming Cadillac doors. That's a Haki Matabuti poem. I was like,
oh wow,
y'all from the future with that. Like that was cool with that. So that because again, it allowed us to understand what was happening. And then there's a Filipino brother by the name of Bamboo who did a song with Killer Mike. And it's on an album called One Rifle, One Family. And it's about how Black and brown folks are pitted against each other. And then what gentrification means and what the resistance to it means and how to actually do it. So those are 5 songs that really come up to me around thinking about solidarity, thinking about reflection, thinking about, the performative and material resources that you need to actually do this work. So those are always songs that stick in my head when thinking about, that time and like what we were trying to do and the struggles that we had in trying to do it.
So one thing I will say about you, since we done went to the fun area at Asia, One thing that I will say about you, and this is one thing I'm saying, I'll edit this out if you want me to, Dave, but if you ever want to get Dave Stovall to squirm, give him a compliment.
Right.
Give him a compliment. You be like this. Listen. He just about to work. He don't want no compliments, but I'm gonna compliment you right now. We gonna celebrate you compliment. We don't care if you ain't about that. We still gonna compliment you right now. We gonna celebrate you.
Right.
Okay, we know you ain't about that. You ain't into all of that. But I'm gonna do it anyway. But one thing I love that you're a good model for us for, and I think you do a lot of real serious work, and you be really out here in these streets, like for real. Like I be like, I don't be doing all that, but yes, I'm still about to work. But you have joy, I feel like, and you have fun, and you made it like okay to like. I think like I saw myself in you a little bit when I was coming up. That it's okay to be me about how I'm fun and I'm goofy and I have joy and stuff, but I'm also serious about the work. And I think that sometimes you can't do that, but I think that so how does your fun side and your joy sustain you? Because that's one of my favorite things about you is that you have that, all of that.
Yeah. I think for me, the most important thing, and this is something that I learned much later, right? Because I come out of, kind of a youth work field where it's like, the youth workers hanging out with the organizers. Everybody's just like, work hard, play hard, go. Each one of you go till you drop, right? If you at the party, you close it down, right? If you at the community center, you wait till everybody leave and you sweeping the floor. All of that type of piece until that really starts to eat you from the inside out, right? Your body takes score of all that, right? And then it's just being like, look, you can't handle that type of load. So what I actually have learned, and I would say, man, probably over the last 6-7 years from young folks and my partner, actually, you have to be overcommitted to the spaces that bring you joy over the ones that bring you despair. Right. And that's something that I had to wrestle with that. Right. So what is that overcommitment? Right. What is the overcommitment to joy? Right. And that because one of the things is you have to make the claim. Right. You have to make the claim to joy. Right. And that to me has really come out in all these really kind of interesting ways. Right. In terms of really understanding, for me, it's like understanding stillness. It's understanding reflection, is understanding what the responsibility is in doing work and then being at peace with those things, right? Because in younger days, it was all turn up, right? I mean, I was turn up from when my eyes opened until my eyes closed, right? But now it has to be one and that wasn't necessarily joyous, right? It was more kind of fever pitch energy, where now being able to relax and dedicate time to relaxing and relaxing with others really is the replenishing that I see that I need. So that to me has been clear, and you always have to make that claim, right? I still have that kick it energy in me, but at the same time, it's much more measured, right? In terms of how to do it in a way that's much more healthy, right? Because I did not because when it was just turn up time, it was just like, look, we turn it up like it's a 4-day run. Let's get it, right? So that just doesn't do your body well after certain periods of time.
And so, what is kick it energy again? What is that?
Right, it's just that, like as you all refer to as younger folks, that's the turn up, right? That's that when you turn it up, you are just like, man, I can stay at this level for elongated periods of time. Right. But, after a while, your body just doesn't, it's not healthy, right? Like you developing all these kind of weird, strange things. I was going to doctors for a second, thinking that I was having heart problems when it was really just an advanced form of acid reflux. But the doctors were saying, it's like, look, this is treatable, but if you don't do things differently, this could become esophageal cancer, right? So, they was just breaking it down, and I was just like, oh, okay, so now you got to think about it in a very different way. And I really lucked up because one of the doctors who I was in consultation with, he was like, look, man, I'm not going to medicate this. He was like, I'm not going to medicate this. It's just stuff that you need to do. And I was just like, man, word. Okay. Let me go with that.
I'm over here laughing because even though I'm younger than Dave, I feel like I'm always trying to match his energy. I'm like, damn, Dave, why you got so much energy?
I know. I can't hang with him. Listen, any other interview, I'd be having like 10, Asian, I'd be having like 10, 15 questions. I was like, I could probably get away with just 4 good ones with Dave because he's going to be able to.
and to you all's point, I was just having a text conversation with my mom who just turned 80, and she was talking about this class she going to and this other. I was like, man, look, it's a whole situation. She like, yeah, she was like,
if you want to understand, then meet his mama, and then it just comes in perspective. Like you don't need to ask no more questions. Like you be like, he's the only child. He's such a, you be trying to really wrap your finger around. He's from Chicago, but meet his mama, and I feel like that just puts everything in perspective. You're like, oh. Okay, no, let's make this.
Yeah, literally a couple days. She was like, "Man, look, because she got back she does these full body workout classes. So they got it set up. They got the ventilation set up. It's in a gym. It's only about 12 of them, so they can get 20 feet between each other. So she's like, yeah, child, we had to do all the protocols. And then after that, we went to the other joint. So then I'm trying to do the other situation, but we couldn't space right. But so I had to leave that one and then go to the other one. I'm like, okay, all right. Right. So that's the example of healthy living and what healthy living can do because of an overcommitment to joy, right? Because she's clear about what takes us out, right? Especially her as a Black woman and what has taken so many of her folks out, which in some ways is preventable, in other ways structural, right? So really kind of thinking about how to do that. So that to me really is has become important, really important, especially over the last 6-7 years.
So what do you think, Stovall, what do you think is the most misunderstood aspect of your work? Specifically across, it could be like your arguments presented in this book or across your work. I'm familiar, stuff that I've read of your work is critical race praxis. Like I see it as an example in this book and I've read it in other places, but I know you do a whole bunch of other stuff. So you could talk about anything. You could talk about in the book, or is there anything that you think is misunderstood, or even it could be about you as a researcher, it could be about you. I don't think you care though, but
because I wouldn't even say it's misunderstood as much as it's harder for me to articulate. I think one of the things that is hard to articulate is the difficulty of the work. Right. So that because once you stand against those traditional paradigms, you have to be able to say, all right, here's what it is. So I think it's really around, it's not so much that it's misunderstood as much as it's more difficult to articulate. And I think the thing that's hardest to articulate is the difficulty of the work, right? Because a lot of times people will read something and they think about the finished product, right? They don't think about the things that go into creating it, right? And that particular challenge is difficult. And I think it's hardest to articulate that, because the only thing that I find myself being able to say is, this is something that we need to think about doing in perpetuity. And it's a long and hard haul, right? It's tougher work. And, when you situate yourself against those traditional research paradigms, it's you saying that the concern is not the traditional research paradigm as much as it is what you are trying to do, right? So I think for me, that's the most challenging thing to articulate is the difficulty.
Well, we want to say thank you so much. I'm so happy that you said yes to our podcast, and we trying to do what you want to do. What you say in the book, this podcast is all about just making these conversations more accessible. Not trying to teach people per se, but people who care about these, that are in other spaces that are non-teachers, and we appreciate you making this a priority and being here and showing up and sharing. It's going to help so many people and things for people. There are people who are not academics that are interested in these topics, that want to talk about these things, that care about this stuff. When I go around my back to Buffalo and my working class church I grew up in, they be wanting to talk about all this stuff. Okay. My aunts, they be asking me about this. And so I'm like, so that's what this is about. And so I know you wrote about, wanting to always struggling with making your work accessible, but this is one way. It's accessible. People can hear about it, just listen to it, and they can listen to it. They don't have to have subscriptions. They could go to the website and listen to it for free, so they don't even have to have like Spotify or anything. They could just listen whenever they want. And so thank you for being a part of this and making your work accessible to.
Man, thank y'all so much. Love y'all. Truly appreciate it. I needed that good medicine from that bullshit meeting that I was in before I came on with y'all.
I saw your energy. I knew somebody did something, and I was about to fight.
Yeah, it was funky, but thank y'all for sure.
Yes. Okay. Y'all all have a good night. Thank you so much. I am so grateful for Dr. David Stovall. I'm grateful for his light, care, joy, wisdom, and example. I want us to constantly consider his charge. What does it mean to be accountable to those I say I care about? And I think another subliminal question he offered was, what does it mean to be accountable to myself, my joy, and others? Can we be okay with doing what we can and allowing others to do what they can in the struggle? Because we have to be healthy and well for the struggle. And did you write down the playlist? Because I know I did. Overall, I'm holding on to being overcommitted to the spaces that bring me joy over the ones that bring me despair. Whew. Thanks, Stove. Thank you for listening to part 2 of our And the Struggle Continues series. If something from this episode resonates with you, please share it with others and let us know through our website, evolvingeducationproject.com. Be sure to tune in for part 3 next Wednesday for our dialogue with 2 hunger strikers. Trust, you do not want to miss that. To find out more about the Evolving Education Project, to write in, or to join our listserv, check us out at evolvingeducationproject.com. And please subscribe to this podcast and follow us on Instagram, X, and Facebook. If you can only choose one, please follow us on Instagram and love all of our posts. Support that doesn't cost a dime. If you've been enjoying our podcast, you can also support us by writing a review. Favorable reviews help more educators, organizers, families, communities, and activists find us. We hope to continue to cultivate an authentic audience and community. We want you to help us to evolve over time and shape what this could be. Now that you know what we're about, let us know what you want to learn more about, authors that you would like us to interview, discussions you would like to have. Okay, that's all for now, good people. Tune in next Wednesday for a new episode. We out.